So this right here is a Slingshot. There's several brands that make them. The original one was made by Mark Bell several years ago, I think over a decade ago, actually, if I remember correctly. I saw it first, probably like around 2010 is when I first saw it. But there's definitely different brands that sell them. And this one just happens to be one of the brands that I saw on Amazon, right? So it's pretty simple concept, actually. Essentially what it is, it's a very tough fabric, extremely tough fabric that is interwoven with some type of elastic material. It could be some type of rubber elastic. I'm not exactly sure what the elastic part is in terms of what it's made of, but it's embedded in the tough fabric, right? And it's extremely tough. It's very hard to pull apart, which is going to become important when I talk about what it's used for. And it has these two holes on it where your arm goes into, obviously. So let me put it on and then kind of explain the mechanism of what it actually does. So I have it on now. It's a little bit hard to see on the camera, but I have it on. And as you can see, the holes is where my arms go in. And usually when people use the slingshot, they put it where the elbow section is closer to the middle, or sometimes a bit higher, right? So the elbow is kind of closer to the end here. So it really depends on comfort level, how big your triceps are, things like that. But for me, usually where I put it is right here. So my elbow is like kind of right here. So I would say about a third up into the actual sleeve, but this is how it looks. Right now on my side profile here, you're gonna see that when I put my arms up here and I try to pull, there's a lot of resistance that the slingshot is putting into my arms, right? Because it wants to push you forward. It wants to pull you forward, right? And this is very important when we're talking about what it actually does, right? So the slingshot is usually used when you want to overload on bench press, usually bench press motions with a barbell, when you want to overload. So an example, let's say your max bench is 275. That's your max 1 rep max, and you want to overload. That's where the slingshot can be brought into play. Now, what it actually does is, let me put in position. Let's say you have 315 on the bar, 275 is your max, but you want to put 315 on the bar. You have the 315 here, right? And when you're pressing it down, or rather you're pushing or pulling the bar down to you, right? There's a lot of pressure being built up here, right? Because the band wants to push you forward. So what it does is that when you get all the way down to about here, where usually the bar ends up in, it gives you that extra support to push forward and be able to actually bench the 315. So I would say the band adds about 30 to 50 pounds of overload on your bench. Now, this is very important, right? Because a lot of people seem to think that the use of the slingshot to overload on your bench is going to directly influence or add pounds to your overall max, right? And that's where a lot of people kind of get it incorrect, right? What the slingshot does is it helps you, first of all, handle bigger weights, heavier weights. So you get accustomed to how heavier weights over your maxes, right? And that's very important to have more or less your nervous system, your muscle structure, and your just overall your body get used to heavier weights on the bar. That's one great example of why to use the slingshot. Another one is because, like I was mentioning, when you are bench pressing, right, and you have the bar here and it pushes the bar forward to start the movement, once you get to about here, this lockout position, which is not a lot, right, but it is an extremely important part of the lift, that's all you. There's little to no support on the lockout when you use the slingshot. So indirectly, it does help with increasing your lockout power. Because if you have a weight that is heavier than your max, and the lockout is all you, or pretty much all of you at that point, then that indirectly it does affect your overall potential to bench heavier weights because you have a stronger lockout. But again, directly, I don't think the slingshot in and of itself is going to help you increase your bench total, right? Your total max that you could actually do. So how do you use this? When should you use this, or should you even use this? So I would say if you are a beginner in terms of lifting and learning how to bench, I don't think the slingshot is going to give you much of anything, to be honest, because at that point it's very important to learn the form, learn how to bench correctly, learn how your body reacts to the bench press in and of itself. That's going to be very important in the first couple, I would say the first year, 2 years of benching, right? Now, once you start getting into your intermediate phase of lifting, right? So let's say your max is already 225, and you're kind of progressing a bit more and getting above those beginner gains that you usually get. The band, it can come into play for sure. But what happens sometimes is people become over reliant on the band, and they think just because, okay, my max bench is 225, I can load it up with 250 and I can bench that not just for one, but for multiple sets and reps with an overload. That kind of creates a false sense of progression. So I would say even when you're more intermediate, beginner intermediate, I wouldn't say using it is the most efficient use of your time when you're building strength and power. So what this brings me to is when you start to be able to bench 315 plus, that is a good time to use the slingshot, because I would say 315 being a milestone for a lot of people, a lot of the weight after 315, you can feel how heavy even 5-10 pounds feels once you start to hit 315. So being able to get accustomed to those heavier weights once you can bench 3+ plates is actually very useful. It has been useful for me once I hit 315 and I started to notice that even if I added 5 pounds, that difference from 315 to 320 was very big. And if I didn't have kind of a foresight as to how 320 felt, I would throw myself off mentally, psychologically. So adding the slingshot helped me to overload and to feel out 320. Okay, that's how 320 feels. Then I can bench it safely with the slingshot, get a little support at the bottom, and get stronger on the lockout, right? So when it got time to actually bench 320, I could do it much safer and with better form so that you don't get a lot of form breakdown, which is very important. Which brings me to the other point of using the slingshot, how the slingshot is made to fit on you. I think one of the added benefits is that it forces you to have good form, right, on the slingshot when you use the slingshot. So typically, this is how my form is more or less, but you're here, and when the bar's going down, it forces you to tug your elbows in, which is extremely important to have a strong bench. A lot of people, I think, especially beginners, they tend to flare out their elbows because the weights are heavy, right? So typically people are like, okay, well, weights are heavy. I feel pretty weak if I'm just kind of using my triceps. I'm going to try to use more of my shoulder and upper body to muscle the weight up. But that's where you start to get hurt, because there's a lot of shoulder movement and you can tweak that. And I mean, I'm definitely guilty of that myself. So with the slingshot, what it can do, even maybe for some beginners, maybe, is learning how to have proper form, right? So if you're here and the bar's going down, it forces you to tuck in your elbows so that you're at the strongest position you can be and go through the movement in that form that is the most powerful and efficient for bench pressing. So that's another reason why I think using the slingshot is a good idea. Now, should you or do you ever need to use the slingshot at any point in time? This is a solid no. You don't need it. Honestly, I didn't start using the slingshot until I was well into my lifting, I would say 5-6 6 years into my lifting. I had already benched 315. I had already benched 355 at some point in that range of, yeah, the first 6 years that I was, lifting and powerlifting and bodybuilding. So I didn't really start to use it until maybe like 2021, 22 is when I kind of brought it in. And truth be told, I didn't really use it all that much in the beginning because it kind of felt uncomfortable. It is a little bit uncomfortable to wear. Once you wear it for a long period of time, you get used to it. But it can get a little bit uncomfortable. So I kind of used it maybe like once every other week. But now I use it far more because I am trying to get my lockout to be stronger. So I am overloading at least once a week to get that strength on the lockout. But don't be fooled. It's definitely not something that's going to help me actually get stronger throughout the whole movement. So that's something that I really want to hone in on. If you want to increase your bench, the Slingshot is not going to take you there. It's an assistance to support your overall strength journey, right? So that's basically kind of a small percentage of what the Slingshot is used for, at least in the applications of like, powerlifting. Some other people also use it to add more volume to their training, right? So let's say you can bench 225 for 5 reps, right? And that's your max 5 reps. With the Slingshot, you might be able to get 8 or 10. So you can add more volume to your training. But remember, keep in mind that a lot of those reps, you're not going to be pushing a lot from this position because you're being helped by the band, right? So if you can get 5 with 225 by yourself, and then you put on the Slingshot and you do 10, sure, you are doing more, but keep in mind what percentage of that is being done by the Slingshot. It's probably more than you think, right? And the lockout is you, but there's not a lot of chest activation at the lockout as much as there is when you're down here actually pushing the bar forward. So keep that in mind. I see some people use it for more volume. It has its applications, but I myself, wouldn't really go that route. I don't use it for that, to be quite honest. I would say in those instances when you want to add more volume, do a little bit lighter weights and then just increase your volume that way. I think that's a better use of your time, and you're actually getting that chest activation, that tricep activation that you want to get either stronger or add more muscle mass, right? So that's pretty much it in terms of what the Slingshot is. I would say it's a cool thing to at the very least own in case you want to use it. It's a cool little accessory to kind of bring out every once in a while if you just want to experiment. But once you do start to get stronger, 315 plus bench, it can be a good tool to, at the very least, get used to heavier weights so that when you train up to those weights, you're not caught off guard and you know how it feels when you actually bench it. But yeah, that's the Slingshot. There's a lot of different ones out there. I got this one off of Amazon several years ago. Probably got it for about $25. It was really cheap, and it has lasted, yeah, like I mentioned, several years. The stitching has kept up. There is no frayed stitching anywhere, and I have abused this thing the last couple of months. I've been using it all the time. If you see my strength checks, and it's pretty much intact. The fabric hasn't lost any elasticity or firmness. So that's pretty cool. I do see some that have a cut in the middle here, so it gives you even more flexibility there, but this one didn't have that. This particular brand, what's it called? Let me check real quick. So this is called Sawans. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that. You guys can tell me. Sawans. Has different sizes. I got the 2XL just because I do have bigger arms. I do have bigger triceps. And the XL, I have a buddy at the gym that has the same one, and I think he got the XL, and that one's way too tight. And it's just uncomfortable. It starts cutting circulation, and just it's not worth it. So I did get a 2XL. And depending on, what phase of my training I am, gaining weight or losing weight, it might fit a little bit tighter or looser, but I'd rather have that kind of like grace of having maybe half an inch to play with than to have a super tight one that, you know, it's just, I'm not going to get a lot of use out of it. So this is a good one, I would say, if you want something cheap just to try out. I do know that the more expensive slingshots by Mark Bell, I guess the original ones, I know there's an other, you know, reputable brands. This is not a reputable brand, I would say. It's not known is what I'm trying to say, but known brands. I know obviously the Slingshot by Mark Bell. I think it's either Titan or Inzer that makes another one. I don't recall which one, or maybe both. I don't remember. Those can be pretty expensive. I would say $60 to 100 plus. I've seen them, so just be aware of that. But if you want something cheap, very cheap, I recommend this one. You'll get a lot of life out of it. But yeah, that's the Slingshot. Let me know what you guys think. Have you used it? Have you seen people use it? And if you are gonna get one, how are you gonna use it? Let me know. And check out the training videos, because I'm gonna be kind of showing you how I use it myself too, right? So that's pretty much it. Have a great one, guys.